So yeah, this topic is about AI and RG, two double letters, and how they all fit together. So come on, have a seat. We have a great panel here. We have Brett Abarbanel from University of Las Vegas, Nevada. Lauren Iannarone from Playtech. Paula Murphy from Mindway AI, and Declan from TransUnion. So we have payments, we have an operator, we have an educator or a researcher, and we have a consultant who specializes just in this space. So, folks, I think AI may be the biggest technological innovation since the smartphone. But I, for one, find it to be really hard to understand how it all works. Could you just start, can we start this off by just explaining how you use it or how it's used in your own field or with your clients? And why don't we start with Paula, who is the expert who is the consultant in space.
Well, I'll let you guys be the judge of whether I'm the expert or not when I finish talking. But I think for us, the clue is in the name of the business, right? So we are Mindway AI. It is the crux of what we do. We do consultancy, but the core of our business is actually that we're a solution provider. So a lot of the conversations that we've heard today, especially on the operator panel, around understanding player behavior and being able to interact with those players, well, that's the core of what we do. So originally we were a Danish business, spin out from a university in Denmark, and we basically have built on this scientific understanding of problematic play or of understanding markers of problematic play. So we draw from lots of different scientific disciplines. From neuroscience, we were founded by a professor of neuroscience. From psychology, both from a clinical perspective and from a research perspective. And we also actually build in lived experience into our algorithm, as well as sort of cognitive science these days. So we have this kind of foundation of understanding the science of problematic play. We then harness the AI technology to replicate that expert human decision making when looking at the player base from information that we see in the spin level data. Behavioral information. So effectively you end up with an army of psychologists looking at your players 24/7, an army that never sleeps, right, because it's AI. And that gives you the intelligence as an operator that everybody has been talking about today, that real requirement to understand what's happening with their player database. We then sort of take that a little bit further and we advise around what those problems are. So the AI that we produce is completely explainable and understandable. So when you then go in to have an intervention with that player, you're speaking to them about themselves, you're talking to them about something they'll recognize their own behavior in, which obviously lifts that level of efficacy from the intervention. And I can go in and expand on that as we go through the panel.
Yeah, let's continue.
That's the nutshell.
Got it. And Brett, at UNLV, how are you approaching this?
So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the International Gaming Institute, we've been around since 1993, which makes us one of the oldest gambling research and education institutes in the world. And as the area of gambling has evolved, so too have we. We started a lot with casinos and land-based gambling, and now we've expanded quite significantly. And so as we've integrated new technologies like artificial intelligence, largely this has been done in one of two ways. The first is we incorporate it into a lot of our research. So this may be something like our Payments Research Collaborative, where we've used different types of AI modeling to look at different player behaviors with the at the base level, right? Deposits and withdrawals, as well as other financial transactions, which I know Declan can get into in more detail, and how those relate to gambling behavior, as well as the major areas within the ethics of AI, because of course there's more than just the ethics of using such technology within the scope of gambling, but the technology itself often comes with many ethical questions that we have to consider within that space. We also incorporate it into our different education programs. So clearly, one of the reasons we have a panel like this is to talk about what this subject is. We also incorporate it into our different education programs that we have.
Thank you. And Lauren, Playtech, You're an operator. How is it impacting your work, or how is it utilized there?
Well, thanks, Robin, and good afternoon. And actually, as one of we do have some B2C, but we're actually one of the largest suppliers of to the industry in terms of platform content and solutions. So as a technology player in the sector, we're always looking at how emerging technologies, including AI and the different types of AI, can be used to not just enhance the player experience, to innovate, to make processes and tasks more efficient, but also to advance player protection. And back in 2017, we actually acquired a company called BetBuddy, which was founded by data science and scientists and researchers to develop and leverage machine learning to identify problematic patterns of play and to more effectively help operators to not just identify problematic play, but to personalize the engagement and the messaging to players so it can be more timely, more relevant, more effective in terms of not just the messaging, but the interventions as well. So we've after acquiring BetBuddy, we've integrated those tools into our back end to offer to operators, but also have standalone. So it's everything from looking at risk identification and classification, more effectively using the data and the insights to better understand what is driving risk and behavior. It's not all the same, and I think we'll talk about different indicators of problematic and healthy behavior and talk a little bit about that. But also, as I mentioned, create more effective, personalized customer journeys for the consumer to protect them. This is part of our broader offering under what we call Playtech Protect, which isn't just about offering the tools and the technology, but also investing in research. So one of the things, and Paula mentioned it, that's very important is transparency and explainability, but also really investing in research to more effectively inform the evolution of this technology and the application. And then finally, partnerships with academic organizations like UNLV and others, as well as charity partners and other stakeholders in the sector. So a very broad approach.
And Declan, on the payment side, is it?
Sure. So TransUnion is able to leverage our consumer credit database in order to create risk models to identify financial vulnerability in gaming. And we've been supporting operators for well over a decade, assessing financial vulnerability in a gaming context. We leverage data science and machine learning techniques in order to give operators an understanding of the consumer behind the playing activity. One of the things that we're starting to see now with the evolution of AI is operators are now starting to, through working with companies like Mindway and others, they're able to collect and centralize their player behavior data. And so by commingling financial vulnerability assessments with the playing behavior data that operators have, you're able to create models with enhanced predictability, but also start to develop communication strategies, risk mitigation strategies. And one of the key areas that we help operators do is, what do you do when you don't have playing data on somebody? Because oftentimes we find that operators start to flag problematic play once something bad has already occurred. And one of the ways that we can help operators is, how can you get a sense of where someone is from a vulnerability standpoint when you don't have any player behavior data behind you? And so that's one of the key gaps that we're able to plug with the data that we have.
So let's try and get a little bit more granular so that people can have a better understanding of how AI is used to identify and presumably help resolve problem gambling. And Brett, why don't we start with you?
Well, actually, I was going to have Paula start.
Okay, we'll have Paula start it again.
Her business, yeah.
We're going to run the same, we're going to go in the same direction each time then. Okay, that's very good.
I don't mind.
It's a lot easier for me.
I don't mind taking that one. And actually, it's a more complex question than it appears on the surface, I would say. At Mindway AI, we're looking at something like 150 different data points that we see in the spin level data. And when I talk about spin level data, I'm talking every 10-minute sessions for casino play, and I'm talking right down to betting slip by betting slip level for sportsbook. So you're looking in granular detail at what is happening with the play that you're observing. So that's the first thing to say. From those 150 data points, they then feed into our sort of risk indicators, which I would say go beyond what we would generally consider as markers of harm. And the reason that I think this is really important is because it's about context, right? We have to, as an industry, move way, way beyond this idea of, does that marker exist? Yes, no. And this kind of threshold-based approach, which actually serves up a lot of false negatives and false positives and gives us information about customers that we could end up then interacting with the wrong customers in the wrong way. So context is key here, and it's super important. So a really good example of this would be something that is widely recognized as a marker of harm would be, for example, nightly play, or a player that is playing in antisocial hours. So rather than just saying, does that exist, yes or no, we look at the patterns in that play that we observe. We say, is that play featured around the weekend? So it doesn't actually look like it's actually interfering with their day-to-day activity, because we're seeing that it's a Friday night activity that they do, but it doesn't go into the rest of their week. Or are we seeing patterns of play that start off in the evening and lead into the evening? These are into the early hours of the morning. These are two very, very different things.
So you guide the machine model essentially.
Yeah.
Based on intuitive things and things that you understand about the business.
So we train the algorithm to understand context in the same way that those human psychologists, when they're looking at the data to provide the points to train the algorithm on, in the same way they understand context, the algorithm does as well. So if you imagine anything that a human psychologist can sort of build in and understand and pulled from all those disciplines that I talked about earlier, so you have people with research background, you have people with clinical background, you have people with lived experience background, all of that knowledge, all of that experience, cultural differences in gambling behaviours, all of that can be built in and then just thrown across the entire player database. So when you ask me what are the markers we look for, it's really, really tricky to just answer that outright. There are certain things, obviously, time, money spent, all of the usual things, but without context, they are very, very limited.
Perfect. Thank you for setting me up on my little team.
Off you go.
Excellent. So, and what Paula has said has really nailed the core of this, right? The I in AI is intelligence. And how do we gain intelligence? We have to be instructed. We have to be trained, just like the training sets that are used for these sorts of tools. And because AI is a human creation, it has innate in it human biases. None of us are perfect. And so what we put into this model, in many ways, is what we get out of it. Has anybody here taken a coding class of some sort? Oh, thank heavens, I was really worried it would just be me, right? Garbage in, garbage out. That's like one of the first rules you learn during a coding class. And Raz, I see you nodding, and you didn't raise your hand, but I know you've taken coding classes. Yeah. Excellent. Garbage in, garbage out. And this is that broader concept. And when we think about the limitations of the human biases that we have in there, it makes it all the more important that we incorporate all of these different perspectives, like Paula mentioned. We couldn't have just Paula training the model, just like we couldn't have just me training the model. Yeah. We need to have the different psychologist elements. We need to have consultation even with regulators, for example, right? If there are certain compliance issues that have come out all throughout the last few hours, those need to be incorporated into how you're training your model, because you may be building something that does incredible work, but there's a very real chance that at the end of the day, someone's going to say, oh, actually you have to throw it away because it's inadvertently causing harm in XYZ capacity. So when you have those sorts of perspectives and those elements to build into what you have within that model, you have a much more realistic interpretation of natural intelligence or human intelligence. And this is something that we were talking about just earlier. And so I'm going to do the thing that is such a baller family move. I'm going to cite my own father. So my father was an extensive researcher and scientist in AI and machine learning, and he used to talk about natural intelligence in the sense that this is something that we have to fully understand before we can possibly hope to have a true artificial intelligence. But since we don't have a complete understanding of natural intelligence, we're going to have to continue to be looking at how we build these artificial intelligence models, many of which are just machine learning, that we use this kind of broader term, as Paula mentioned, right? There's many different types and forms of this thing. But it becomes that much more important to recognize how we are incorporating our natural intelligence, our human bias, and then making sure that we work with all these other groups to smooth that all out and have the most ideal that we can have without expecting perfection.
Can I just build on that? Because one of the important things, without repeating, I obviously agree with everything you guys have said, but is just to remember it's not a silver bullet, and you always have to have that human in the loop. So Paula talked about context. It's not enough to just deploy AI and hope for the best and think it's great, really going to test and validate the models. You've got to have that human in the loop along the way. And I think one of the things that we found really helpful is that collaboration with different stakeholders. So you are bringing in diverse perspectives to challenge and to validate and to evolve the solutions. It's not enough to just think you've got all the solutions. So the collaboration is really important.
Agreed.
And I think when we talk about the banking and financial services sector, one of the things we've been involved in is a multi-stakeholder initiative to work closely hand in hand between the industry and the financial services sector. Certainly in the UK, lived experience, the charity sector, to look at how can you collaborate, whether it's looking at financial risk assessments and the application of technology to do that, and how does that translate to consistent messaging to the end consumer. So that collaboration piece is really important.
Declan, care to add?
Yeah, tough to follow all of that, to be honest with you. But I agree with everything that's been said. I think context is crucial, and I think one of the main benefits that we're seeing from the application of AI is the ability to focus resources where they are needed most, being able to kind of sift through maybe those who don't quite need intervention and be able to identify those most in need is one of the commercial benefits that's going to drive adoption in the space. Because ultimately, when it comes to the topic of responsible gaming, I'm sure you've run into this as well, it can be a challenge, right? We're dealing in a commercially competitive market, and so being able to demonstrate the fact that actually responsible gaming is an investment that has returns. It has returns cross-functionally. It has returns on your resource deployment. I think that's such a key message for the maturity of the US gaming market in particular.
Can any of you cite where AI applied to RG has had a specific impact? In other words, is someone using this and they've now been able to identify far more problem gamblers and get them into the queue, so to speak, to get them help? Maybe you've seen it more across your clients there?
Yeah, I mean, it's what we do all day, every day. So, yep, I can cite, the solutions.
But can you give us specifics, something so that people can relate to how it works?
Well,
how it's worked, not works, how it works.
In terms of giving a specific, again, that's pretty tricky to sort of go, right, this one case. But as I said, it's what we do all day, every day. And I think, actually, to best answer this question, I'm going to refer back to the work that we do with the guys at Epic, who have been mentioned a number of different times throughout the conference today. Because we work really closely with them. And when I say there's lived experience that's baked into our algorithm, that's through the partnership that we have with those guys. And early on, when we first started working together, I remember Dan Spencer, one of the guys at Epic, saying to me that he felt that when he was gambling, if something like Mindway had existed, he would not have got into the position he got in. Because somebody there who completely understands what we're doing with the algorithm and how it works, and now works with the industry to ensure they know how to take that and make the most of the intervention strategy as well, actually looked at that in the context of his own behavior and said, this would have stopped me in my tracks. So that, I believe...
Yeah, that's a good example.
Yeah.
Lauren, are you, in Playtech, have you now, because you have this new resource, this engine, if you will, has it increased the level of discovery that you've acted upon there? Has it increased the number of people who are flagged, so to speak, if that's the way it works?
Yeah, well, obviously, we're providing that technology to operators. So operators are utilizing the technology in order to more effectively identify and intervene. One of the things that we did, and I think this is probably a kind of example of why it's so important to also collaborate and conduct research in this area, is to better understand the impact, both positive but also some of the issues that this application can have. So, for instance, we've just launched a 4-year research program with one of our partners, Holland Casino, as well as 2 universities in the Netherlands, to look at how can this technology more effectively help with personalized messaging. And so doing that research and ensuring that we're doing some practical research to gain those insights will better help us understand what's effective, what's not, and continuously improve. So I think, stay tuned, because certainly the outcome of that research and others that we're doing, like with Brett and others, will be really, really important to showcase, or to show what is effective and what's not.
I think it's also important to recognize within the scope of your question, which is a great question. So I mean, as soon as you said that, yes, well, years of this stuff, right? Is that AI...
Give me the numbers. I mean, it's 20% more. Or
I don't think we have those specific numbers yet, because we had such a tough time even starting out with this baseline. But when it comes to AI, it didn't just show up on the scene, right? I mean, when ChatGPT showed up, Paul, I think the wording you used a few weeks ago was... it's like the sexy version, right? It's like, this is the one that everybody knows about. It's sensationalized.
That's the word.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
Sexy.
That was going to be my next point.
Well, listen, shoot. But this idea is that didn't just show up on the scene. How long do you think people spent creating ChatGPT before it even came about? BetBuddy, that Lauren mentioned, had been around for years before it was acquired. And that has used different AI methodologies basically since its inception. And so some of these tools were already in place. So it's hard to kind of parse out 20%, because some of what we were doing before already used many of these same tools. We now just have a much more concrete, and even that's not particularly concrete, idea of what it is and how we can use it. We're still kind of figuring out some of these little mushier parts of what AI is and can be.
If I could summarize it in super simplistic terms, would you say that is it fair to say that AI enables us to gather together multiple experts, multiple disciplines, massive amounts of data, very personalized, and process it all thoughtfully?
This gives us intelligence on scale that we would not be able to achieve manually. And then through use of analytics tools, it enables us to look at that intelligence and see what is happening within our customer data. So, for example, we have plots that chart sort of the health of the overall customer data. So at the just click of a button, you can see, is my at-risk group getting bigger or smaller? Are my at-risk players coming from a place where they started off okay and they're developing to being at risk? So straight away you can start thinking, right, how do I strategize around this? The other bit of functionality that we've released recently is this idea of an intensity model, right? So you ask about how do you see if what you're doing is making any difference, and how do you assess that efficacy? So if somebody's behavior changes, directly after an intervention and you see more controlled behaviour, that's great, but it's not enough to impact the risk model because you've not seen the consistency.
Right.
So what we do is we track both long-term and short-term play, and in tracking what's happened just after that intervention's taken place, you can go, has this intervention worked? Is it good for this particular player? Do we need to escalate to a different kind of intervention? And then you gain, like these guys have been saying, this is based on data and it's based on science. You gain the knowledge and understanding from that and you can build on it. So it's something that's just always evolving.
You know, one of the reasons Wall Street has always loved the gaming industry is because there's so much data. The regulation makes the data be published, requires that the data be published, and so research analysts can analyze all this, make judgment calls, and then investors can make decisions backed up by data. So it sounds like AI is the thing that can really supercharge the responsible gaming, which is terrific. Let me just do a quick audience poll. How many people in this audience, other than using ChatGPT to look up history things, and how many people have used or are using AI in their work right now? It's pretty good. I'd say about a third of the audience, half to a third. Very impressive. I've got to figure out a way to use it other than ChatGPT. We are unfortunately just out of time right now, but if we could just can you give me a 10 seconds thought on where you think it stands right now? Where are we? Are we in the first inning, in the second inning? How far along are we on this? Realizing this is something without an end.
Well, I noticed you used a very American game as your example, and I'm using that as a delay tactic to come up with a 10-second answer to what you said. So I would say that within the scope of football, we are in the probably 9th or 10th minute of the game, and that doesn't include stoppage time, because there's so much more that we can learn about this thing, and there's so much more that human beings can contribute to the continued development of intelligence. Intelligence, as we know it, has no cap. So let's keep finding that.
Lauren?
I would maybe make an analogy to an Iron Man. There will be good times and bad over the day that you're competing. And I think some real opportunities, but also to be mindful of the challenges ahead. For instance, evolving regulation, stakeholder expectations. We talked about investors earlier. There will be evolving standards to come, and there'll be unintended consequences, and there'll be lots of learning. So I would say early days, and you're still training probably for the Ironman.
10 seconds.
I would say that the whistle has just gone, right, and we've started the game, and we've got a lot to go, and it's exciting, and it's going to be a game where there's a lot of action going on. But the information is the key thing, and that's important. Information and understanding.
Look, I think it's a means of compounding insights and research, and it's going to be really exciting to see what is the culmination of that research and where does that lead us. I think it's going to be very exciting to see over the next 3 years.
Great. Thank you very much. Great job.
Okay, following the
Thanks, ladies.
instructions.